So, there is this question from an open letter written back in 2007, and it is the kind of question that just like completely stops you in your tracks. It is incredibly raw. The question is simply, how can you not hate the Japanese?
Yeah, it immediately pulls you right into this heavy vortex of, historical grievance and national trauma. It is a very visceral starting point.
It really is. And, normally when you hear a question like that, you expect the answer to be this long essay about peace treaties or historical apologies.
Right, or the nuances of geopolitics.
Exactly. But the answer we found in today's source material, it doesn't talk about history at all. It actually answers that question by proposing we uh we basically delete the concept of Japan entirely.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and while we are at it, delete the concept of China, the United States, all organized religion, and just for good measure, delete the human family unit too.
It escalates so quickly. I mean, going from a specific historical grievance to the absolute demolition of human society as we know it.
Right. So today we are taking a deep dive into the source material that contains this response. It is an open letter titled, "We Are the Globalists" to Herdes.
Written by a figure named Xu Feng, right?
Yeah, on April 30th, 2007. And this document lays out the foundational philosophy of a movement called Lifechanyuan. Now, before we go any further, you, the listener, really need to know exactly what we have on the table today.
Definitely. This text touches on some highly polarizing stuff.
Exactly. I mean, political, national, religious ideologies, basically everything from nationalism and Marxism to extreme globalism. So we are approaching this entirely as impartial observers.
Right, we aren't endorsing any of this.
And we aren't condemning it either. We're just dissecting it as this fascinating architectural blueprint of a radical utopia. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it. Because it really is a phenomenal case study in utopian thinking. It diagnoses what it sees as a fundamental flaw in the human condition and prescribes a completely uncompromising solution.
So let's start with that initial catalyst. The writer, Hartes, asks how Shui Feng cannot harbor hatred for the Japanese. And Shui Feng's immediate response is to completely bypass the history.
Yeah, he states flatly that his movement, Lifechanyuan, just cannot be built with hatred. It can only be built with love.
But he takes it a step further, right? He claims that his movement doesn't belong to any country, any political party, religion, or nationality. He introduces this term, the Chanyuan Celestial.
Right, which is the title for the members.
Yeah, and he says this identity possesses zero nationality.
What's fascinating here is what Xu Feng demands of the reader, right in that moment. He forces this massive temporal shift.
What do you mean?
Well, he argues that you cannot look at international relations through a historical lens because history is exactly where the hatred lives, and you can't even look at it from a present-day lens because the present is defined by rigid borders.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, he insists you have to look at the world from the imagined future perspective of what he calls the Lifechanyuan era.
Which is, such a difficult psychological leap to make. It's like if your house was just robbed, you don't want the police to say, well, look at this from the perspective of a future where property doesn't exist.
Exactly. That doesn't help you right now.
But that is essentially his move. He treats human society like a corrupted geopolitical hard drive.
Oh, that is a good analogy.
Yeah, usually diplomats act like IT support, right? They try to patch the bugs of nationalism, they sign treaties, they quarantine the corrupted files of historical trauma.
But Xu Feng isn't trying to fix the bugs.
No, he wants to wipe the drive entirely. He wants to write a brand new operating system where the concept of nations doesn't even exist in the code.
And in that new operating system, the hatred that Hartes is asking about isn't resolved. It's rendered fundamentally obsolete.
Because you can't have nationalistic hatred if the core variable of nation has been deleted.
Exactly. Deleted from your mental framework entirely.
So we have this beautiful, borderless software, in theory, but software needs servers. It needs to live in the physical world, which is heavily guarded by borders.
Right. So how does he bypass the very geography he claims doesn't exist?
Well, reading through the geographic footprint of Lifechanyuan, I was actually really surprised.
Yeah, it scrambles your expectations on purpose, I think. Hartes clearly assumes this is just a Chinese organization dealing with Chinese historical grievances.
But Shui Feng lays out a completely different map. He explicitly claims the movement originated in Africa.
Wait, Africa?
Yeah. The letter is written in Chinese to a Chinese writer, heavily referencing Asian geopolitical history. So why anchor the origin in Africa?
Is he doing that just to intentionally scramble the reader's geographic bias?
Partly, yeah. It forces the reader out of their Sino-centric viewpoint. But he follows it up by saying the initial publicity for the movement's concept started in Japan. And then it saw extensive traction in North America. He even makes a very pointed note that the website servers for Lifechanyuan are explicitly not located in mainland China.
So he's actively trying to prove the infrastructure is decentralized.
Exactly. He lists the demographics of current Chanyuan celestials to back this up, claiming followers from the US, Canada, France, Germany, New Zealand, Taiwan, and China.
Wow, that is quite a list.
And to really hammer home this idea of geographic fluidity, he makes this wild claim. He says, if I want, I can become an African in 3 months.
Which is such a revealing statement about how he views human identity. To Zhu Feng, cultural heritage, territorial belonging, even deeply ingrained social behaviors are just temporary software programs.
Right, just apps you can swap out.
Exactly. He believes you can uninstall Chinese culture and install African culture in a matter of months. He sees human identity as completely untethered from the soil you happen to be standing on.
But how does he actually justify that? I mean, becoming deeply integrated into a completely different culture in 90 days borders on the impossible unless you view culture as entirely superficial.
Yeah, it is a huge stretch.
But leaving that aside for a second, I have to challenge this whole global movement narrative because there is a massive contradiction staring us in the face in the source material.
The language issue.
Yes. Hardy's assumes it is a Chinese organization because the entire foundational text is written in Chinese.
Right.
So if this is truly a universal, borderless movement right now, isn't it highly hypocritical that the entire operating system is currently locked behind a single language barrier?
And that's the exact tension Hardy's brings up. And Zhu Feng actually refers to that assumption as an illusion.
An illusion? How so?
Well, he acknowledges he is currently building the main concept framework in Chinese, but he defends this by saying she is basically in the blueprint phase.
I see.
Yeah, he claims to be in active dialogue with Englishmen, Portuguese, Brazilians, and Africans, who are all allegedly waiting for this philosophy to be translated into their own languages.
So he promises to roll out English, Korean, and Japanese versions eventually.
Yes, and if you look at the history of major ideological or utopian movements, they almost always require this initial period of linguistic isolation.
That makes sense.
The complex architecture of a new ideology, whether it is a philosophical text or a massive political manifesto, it has to be built in the native tongue of the architect.
Right. It requires nuance that a founder can't just immediately translate.
Exactly. Xu Feng views the Chinese language merely as the temporary scaffolding for a global tower. His ambition is to safeguard the interests of all people, but he has to pour the foundation in the language he actually speaks.
That makes practical sense, sure. But it is still a huge leap of faith for his followers to trust that the scaffolding will eventually come down.
For sure.
But dismantling physical borders and language barriers is really just the warm-up act in this letter.
Oh, definitely.
Because then the text pivots to what else he wants to dismantle, and the scope is staggering. He makes it very clear that Lifechanyuan is not just a self-refining organization.
Right. This isn't like a weekend meditation retreat where you find some inner peace and then go back to your desk job on Monday.
No, he calls it an education on how to be an upright person. And to become this upright person, the text explicitly lists the philosophical, religious, and political paths that you must outright reject walking down exclusively.
He systematically targets the 3 dominant operating systems of human history.
Okay, break that down for us.
First, he targets the spiritual. He rejects the road of Christ, the road of Buddha, the road of the Muslim. Then he targets the socioeconomic. He explicitly rejects the political roads of Marx, Lenin, and Mao Zedong.
Wow.
And finally, he targets the empirical. He rejects the road of science itself.
You know, I was reading that list and nodding along with the religious and political stuff. That is standard utopian fare, clear out the old dogma. But rejecting science.
Yeah, that is a big one.
That really caught me off guard. Why throw out the scientific method?
Because science relies on skepticism,
Right.
empirical division, and the constant questioning of established truths.
Oh, I guess that is true.
If your goal is absolute, frictionless ideological unity, the scientific method is actually a threat. It invites debate.
That is wild.
Xu Feng wants to replace all of these, religion, politics, science, with what he calls the road of the greatest creator.
And the explicit goal is to normalize all religions into one. The phrase in the text translates to all religions returning to one.
Right.
But how do you actually do that? I mean, how do you reconcile the resurrection of Christ with Marxist dialectical materialism or Islamic theology. They're fundamentally incompatible frameworks.
No, you don't reconcile them, you strip them for parts.
Strip them for parts.
Yeah, he doesn't care about the theology or the economic theory. He is extracting the lowest common behavioral denominators, things like peace, charity, and communal harmony.
And just discarding the rest.
Exactly. Discarding the rigid dogmas that cause friction. The idea is that if everyone is staring at the exact same synthesized source of truth, ideological friction entirely disappears.
And when friction disappears, the institutions built to manage that friction are no longer necessary.
Precisely.
Which leads us to the ultimate endgame described in the letter. Feng states that when most people become Chanyuan celestials, states will disappear, religions will disappear, political parties will disappear.
He specifically names the U.S., Britain, Japan, and China as entities that will simply cease to exist.
A complete institutional vacuum.
Right.
But then there is the final item on his list of things that will vanish. And here's where it's really interesting. This is the part of the deep dive that really blew my mind.
I know you're going to say.
At the very end of that list, right after nations and political parties, he includes families.
Yes, families will disappear. It is a staggering, highly provocative addition to the list.
It is completely jarring. I read through the list. Countries, sure, I get the globalist angle. Political parties, okay, a post-partisan utopia. Religions, all right, unified belief. And then your family.
Yeah, it is a huge shock.
He groups the biological human family unit in the exact same disposable category as a political party or a nation state. What is the mechanical logic behind deleting the family?
Well, think of human loyalty like a budget.
Okay.
Feng essentially believes every person only has, say, 100 loyalty coins to spend.
Right.
Under the current system, if you spend 50 of those coins protecting your children and 30 coins defending your country, you only have 20 coins left to care about the rest of humanity.
Ah, I see.
The nuclear family is inherently exclusionary. What does a family say? Family says, my blood first.
Right. I will protect my child over your child.
Exactly. It creates a microfaction. It is the most primal biological form of tribalism.
That makes a terrifying amount of sense.
Right. A nation says my citizens first, a religion says my believers first, but the family is where that exclusionary instinct is actually born.
So if your goal is absolute unity, the family unit isn't just an obstacle. It is the most stubborn, deeply ingrained barrier to that unity.
Yes. You can redraw a border on a map with a pen.
Yeah.
But breaking the biological and emotional loyalty of a mother to her child, that is the ultimate erasure of the old world.
Wow.
The only way to fully fund a global utopia is to bankrupt the family budget so all 100 loyalty coins go directly to mankind as a whole.
That is intense and frankly terrifying to a lot of people.
Definitely.
But it perfectly transitions us from what they want to destroy to why they feel it is absolutely necessary to destroy it. Because Feng isn't just like a cartoon villain trying to erase things for fun.
No, not at all.
The text lays out a very specific core thesis on human misery. He argues that statism and nationalism do not relieve human suffering. They actively aggravate it.
He goes so far as to say they accelerate the occurrence of global disaster.
Because of the division.
Right. The argument is structural. As long as we divide ourselves into these competing factions, whether by a flag, a cross, or a surname, we are inevitably going to fight over resources, territory, and pride.
So the suffering isn't an accident of the system.
No, it is a feature of the division.
To counter this, the movement advocates for forgiving, understanding, respecting, and supporting each other. And this is where we see that stripping for parts you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
Feng explicitly points out how his movement aligns with Jesus' teaching to love your foes, the Buddha's teachings on mercy, and the Confucian tenet of benevolence.
He is basically curating the most pacifist, universally appealing elements of the very traditions he previously rejected as exclusive paths.
Taking the best bits.
Yeah, he takes the love code from their programming, leaves behind the exclusive salvation code, and builds his new system.
But, a system still needs an administrator. Even if you erase borders and families, someone has to run the globe. And Feng's view on leadership is very specific and honestly a bit alarming when you dig into the mechanics of it. He says humanity should not be guided by representatives of different interest groups who just restrict people.
Right.
Instead, we should be guided by the most civilized people.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, he defines civilized in a very deliberate way. He creates a dichotomy between a noble human and an animal.
An animal?
Yeah. To him, an animal, or a lesser human, narrowly campaigns for their own interests or the interests of their specific group. A noble, civilized human is someone who serves the whole of mankind.
Okay, so we are looking at a classic textbook utopian manifesto here, diagnosing global suffering as a symptom of artificial divisions,
Yeah.
prescribing a total erasure of those divisions, and establishing a unified, benevolent leadership.
It is essentially the Platonic ideal of the philosopher king, updated for a hyper-globalized era. But instead of one king, it is a vanguard, a ruling class of the most civilized who have successfully shed all their tribal loyalties.
But here is the massive red flag, the flaw in almost every utopian blueprint. Who exactly decides who is the most civilized?
That is the big question.
Right. Who sits on the committee that defines what the standard for being an upright person actually is?
Exactly.
Because if you have successfully erased all competing political parties and all competing religions, and you have even dismantled the family unit, you have systematically removed every single check and balance on power.
Yep. Whoever defines the greatest creator holds absolute, uncontested authority over the entire human race.
That is the perpetual danger of the utopian vision. In order to cure the disease of human conflict, you have to administer a medicine of absolute conformity.
The vanguard requires total trust from a population that has been completely stripped of all its traditional support networks.
So what does this all mean for you, listening right now? Why should you care about an open letter written almost 2 decades ago responding to a question about historical grudges?
It is a fair question.
Well, because this text forces a mirror up to the way we structure our own lives today. It makes us ask deeply uncomfortable questions about our own loyalties.
It forces you to look at your own loyalty budget, as we called it earlier.
Exactly. Is your loyalty to your country, your political party, your specific social group, or, yes, even your family, keeping you from seeing yourself as a truly global citizen?
It asks the incredibly painful question, are the borders we so fiercely defend, both physical and emotional, actually the source of the suffering we are constantly trying to prevent?
Xu Feng's letter takes an everyday, recognizable human emotion, hatred based on historical trauma, and uses it as leverage to argue that the entire foundational architecture of human society is fatally flawed.
That is a very profound way to look at it.
Let's quickly recap the sheer scale of the journey this source material just took us on. We started with a very visceral, localized question. How can you not hate the Japanese? And the answer we uncovered wasn't diplomatic. It was a sweeping, radical vision of a world where the very concept of Japan or China or America has been completely deleted from the human hard drive.
A world governed by the road of the greatest creator.
Where you don't belong to a nation, you don't belong to a religion, and you don't even belong to a family, you just belong to mankind.
It is a vision that demands the ultimate sacrifice. It requires the complete surrender of your individual, cultural, and historical context for the sake of an unbroken collective peace.
Absolutely.
Which leaves us with a lingering thought to consider long after we wrap up here. If an ideology successfully executed this blueprint, if it erased all nations, all religions, all political parties, and even dismantled your family structure in the name of global peace, what exactly would be left of your individual identity?
Wow. Think about that the next time you look at a map or read a historical timeline or even look at a photo of your own family. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you on the next one.